You're not early, you're just in time. All right. Welcome back to Friday, guys. I'm working on a painting that I started during the pandemic quarantine. And I'm not sure what I'm going to do on this today, but I wanted to kind of move on to another painting and do some touch-ups on this. So the other thing I was going to talk about today is mainly some business stuff for targeted towards young and up-and-coming artists or people who want to make a living in the business of art. I got into a discussion on an artist forum on Facebook regarding some contract issues. The question was regarding work-for-hire contracts. And so a lot of times when you're, one way to sell work is to license the rights for usages like in books or magazines or posters or what have you. So the right to use the work. And when you're doing that, you're creating a license, usually for a specific use in a specific time frame in a specific territory, etc. And these contracts can get really specific or really broad. And one thing that happened, so like when I was starting out back in like 1998, 99, 2000, that time, there was a big discussion in the illustration community about, among various things, the rights grabs that bigger companies were using in all of their contracts. So one of the ways that artists make money is by licensing the rights, and then the ability to sell secondary rights. So say you get a job for a magazine, and then later on that image might be licensed by another company for a book cover or something like that. And so you can get, you can resell the rights to different industries, different uses. And so that's one of the ways that artists make a living, is by selling rights to use the work for commercial purposes. So just give me a second while I clean all the skins off my paint. So the problem was arising that all these companies were requiring more and more rights with not any more pay. And mainly, from what I remember and what I can gather, it was mainly out of a just greed, maybe, or laziness. So companies may want to use it for more than one thing, so they want to own all the rights to the work. And so there's a couple ways to do that. One is to license a broad license that gives a company the right to use it for multiple purposes, or gives it a certain exclusivity in anywhere from a certain area of like a country to the entire world. And so what they started doing is employing these work-for-hire contracts. And what work-for-hire contracts mainly do is they change the legal authorship from the artist to the commissioning party. If I'm misrepresenting some of this, if anybody's an attorney listening to this, please feel free to correct me. But this is my best understanding of it. And so what happens when you sign a work-for-hire contract, you are effectively being treated as if you were an employee of the company, but you're not getting any of the benefits of being an employee, such as health benefits or retirement programs or workers' comp or anything like that. So they're requiring to be the legal authorship of the work while giving you not much of anything else in return. And so that they were grabbing all these rights without increasing the pay, and sometimes the pay was even less. And what happens is, this is kind of a part of business, is that one entity with lots of power will try to steamroll the smaller entities, like such individual artists. Give me a second here, turn off my air conditioning. And so the artist is not in the same negotiating power as like, a big operation, a big magazine or newspaper or something like that. So you don't have the same leverage. And even if you do, you're not aware of what your leverage is, because you're an individual trying to make a living. And so what was happening is that you're competing with all of the people that are coming into the job market as artists. All the other illustrators are just starting out and who are willing to do anything for nothing in terms of pay, and they're giving rights away. So you end up competing with that, even if you've been in the business for decades. And it was really causing some havoc among working commercial artists. So the discussion I was in online wasn't really specific about like what was going on. It was just asking about work for hire contracts. And my opinion was that if you see a work for hire language in a contract, to avoid signing those kind of deals. It might be hard to do when you're starting out. You know, you're trying to make a name for yourself. You're trying to establish something, and even if the project is for some big name entity, you might think it's going to help establish your career or whatnot. But the problem being is that because you are no longer the legal author, that company owns the copyright. And so if you ever did a similar type of work for somebody else, technically they could sue you for copyright infringement if it was too close to the work you created for them, as infringing on their copyright, which they own and are the legal author of. So you could be sued for copying your own work or licensing your own work to someone else if it infringed on, if it was too similar to that project. And so there's other various pitfalls of work for hire, but that's one of them. Can't remember if anybody specifically ever was sued, but I seem to remember somebody ran into legal problems with that. And so part of what I want to talk about is that there are situations where you can employ a strategy of, you know, there's no way you're going to go through an entire career of business and not take it in the shorts from time to time. But you can kind of pick and choose when those opportunities are right for you by having a plan of what you're doing it for. So another thing that will happen is you'll have companies or individuals dangle the prospect of a lot of either like more future work or all the exposure that you're going to get, blah, 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 that sort of stuff. And that's what I call, you know, I got this from my girlfriend, I call cake tomorrow and cake yesterday, but never cake today. So that's the wrong color. What that entails is that somebody will say, you know, oh, we did all this for this other artist. Look how big they're, you know, how successful they are. Like if they're a representative or a gallery or some other entity that hired other artists, they, you know, look at their career. They blew up after they worked with us. Don't you want the same thing? That's what's cake yesterday. And then the other aspect is like, oh, we can promise there's going to be a lot more work after this. We're going to hire you for this and that. And, you know, once we get this off the ground, it's just going to be a lot more work for you. That's cake tomorrow. Or you're going to get all this exposure and all this attention that you would never have gotten or received otherwise. That's cake tomorrow. But when it comes down to what am I getting right now, it's you're getting to do the work sometimes for peanuts on the promise of something else. So it's never, nobody ever wants to pay you today with cake. No cake today. Cake yesterday, cake tomorrow, but no cake today. So still looking for some colors here. What you want to avoid is getting lured into these sort of, not necessarily traps, but they are lures. They're dangling a carrot in front of you to get you to take their job with the prospect of it being in your best interest. So one example I can give of recently, I had a website, gallery website outfit in overseas contact me who said they had a client who wants to order some stuff. They were specifically interested in this one print, but they wanted to sell my work. And so they were promising me like all this, they showed me all this marketing that they would do on their website and that they do so much money and, you know, so much business a month and blah, blah, blah. And so I started drilling down into what they meant, and I started to ask them questions about what do they do for their marketing, what is their plan, and eventually they just quit responding to my emails when I started asking them for details about what they were going to do. So they were promising all this stuff that they've been in business for 40 years. They've, all this sort of razzle dazzle. And what it really boiled down to was that they wanted to buy one piece from me at a wholesale rate for a print. And the problem is that the shipping would cost more than the print. So they wanted me to either split or cover the cost of the shipping as well. And so it was going to turn into no money for me for this one sale, but they were going to then carry my work on their site and start promoting and selling it. The problem is they had like 300, 400 artists on their site with 2 or 3 that they really sold a lot and promoted on their front page. And so I could see what they were doing. They wanted to make this one sale, and the way to get me to help them make this one sale was to promise me all these things that they were going to do, but they weren't really going to do anything. And what happened is they quit responding to me, and eventually I got an email from a individual in that country, and they ordered it from me regular retail price, and I just shipped it over to them. So I realized that sometimes there's not a deal there, and you can be lured into this prospect of a big deal, all this potential, but there's nothing there. And so that kind of goes back to I think I've mentioned in other streams that when I was starting out, I kind of took my sales my sales training video as a movie, Glengarry Glen Ross. And where was I going with this? So there, I lost my train of thought. Sorry about that. If it comes back to me, I'll bring it back up. All right. Oh yeah. So the goal, one of the things in that movie was to, get them to sign on the line, which is dotted. So it doesn't, nothing counts unless you close that sale. And so they were trying to close me on this one particular sale so that they could zoom in here a little bit. They were promising me all this stuff so they could close a sale. And I don't think that they had any intention of doing anything other than closing that sale. And if they did, they would have no problem answering a bunch of questions about what their plan was to promote my work on their site, what their marketing program looked like, all these sort of things, like what their projections for sales might be, just a bunch of basic questions they had no answer for, and they were not interested in answering those questions, and they quit responding to my emails. So if you're getting approached by a company who's promising you a bunch of stuff, you want to drill them down onto what it is exactly that they are promising you. I should have readjusted my easel. All right, I'll work with what I got. Because they will often promise a whole bunch of stuff to get you to move. And then when you start asking for details, they don't really have a plan. They're just giving you a bunch of bullshit. So you want to be able to sort through what's the nonsense and what's a real offer. And so, so they didn't have a real offer. They just had a bunch of empty promises and hypotheticals. That being said, I could have went the other way with it too. So I could have decided that, all right, well, they do have a legitimate website and there is a market there. Even if they don't promote it, it could have been something for me to, sell on their site, or, another avenue. There could be potential sales even if they don't do much with it or have a big plan. But the problem I had with that particular one is it's overseas, and there's no, the problem we were having was there was no sort of solution for what we were going to do about the shipping issue, because the shipping itself, getting items over there, was expensive, and I wanted them to commit to buying a certain amount of inventory and keeping it there, and they weren't really interested in that at all. So anyways, like I said, there was no deal to be had there. And sometimes you have to have that attitude of there's no deal until somebody's willing to sign on the line, and they weren't there quite yet. But there are times when, you know, if there's a way that you can see kind of an ends to a mean, then it might be worth it to take a deal that doesn't benefit you in the short term, but does in the long term. But if you're going to do that, you want to have your own plan of what your objective is. So you don't want to go in and take a shitty deal on the hope that something will come out of it. I mean, you don't want to rely completely on hope on this one. You want to have some sort of idea or plan, and then you want to have a way to get, to back out of it if it doesn't go the way you expected it to go. So an example for that would be, when I was getting into a bunch of galleries, the first thing that was happening is I was getting into a bunch of UK galleries. I had some business managers that one of them was in the UK and had connections with all these galleries, and so I had a relationship that helped me to open the door there. So the thing was that the deal was with a distribution company, and they took a cut. Then my management took a cut, and that was on the wholesale side. Then it went to the gallery. There was another cut. So by the end of it, I was like, on all the work that was selling, I was probably making 15% of the retail price of each piece. And so if you're thinking that, you're getting, you're only getting 50% when you sell through your gallery, I was getting 15% on these sales. But I had a sort of basic plan for that, and that was that this was opening all kinds of doors that would give me room to negotiate later, because I knew the work would sell well. All I had to do was get in it, and then once you start establishing yourself, then you can start negotiating better deals for yourself. And what happened was, it did start selling well, but what happened is the outfit that was the distribution company wanted me to do, for some reason they signed a deal with me, and then they didn't think that my outlaw stuff would sell, even though that was what we were running up the middle with on this project. So they wanted something else they think they could sell. So I created sort of the Power 11 Success stuff, which was like business guys, that sort of thing. It was the same sort of attitudes and things that I was doing with my outlaw stuff, but with different wardrobe and technology in a different time era. And it also allowed me to expand my body of work into something that wasn't going to pigeonhole me into doing outlaw Wild West stuff. Like I didn't want to be pigeonholed. So there was a number of reasons for me to venture into doing some other work. So I was okay with that. And the irony is that the people in the UK, the collector base in the UK, would see my work in a gallery, they like it, then they would go to the websites and they see all my Western stuff, and they wanted to be able to order all that work. And the downside of working with a distribution company is they're a big outfit, they're a big company, and they're not as nimble. They can't just respond to every email. And so what happened is that the collectors would get impatient, and they would just contact U.S. galleries and start buying their work from the U.S. galleries. So it worked to my advantage in the short term, in that I was able to sell the work to to the UK through US galleries and get a bigger cut of the sales price. So that was short term, but it was harming the sales in the UK, which was bad. And what I wanted that to take off so that I could then, convince them to start carrying the work that sold even better and have that market start really working. So my goal was to do what it took to make that market work. And I was fighting against them because they wouldn't listen to me because they were a huge operation. And of course, everybody thinks they know what they're doing better, but not to say that I'm some genius, but I've been selling my work at that point for, 12, 13 years. So in person to thousands of people. So I had a pretty good idea of like how to sell the work, what sold and what didn't. And, then they like to pull that, well, we've been in business for 30 years and we know how to sell to our clients. So you run into that too. Anyways, I was getting proven right in that the kind of work that I already did was the work that really was going to sell well there, but I still couldn't convince them. So anyway, the whole point of that is that I had a plan to, so financially, in the short term, the sales were not benefiting me really at all. And you see this same sort of thing. If you look at you want to see bigger examples, if you look at like Amazon or, Uber, these are billion-dollar companies that take huge, massive losses for numbers of years in order to gain a market share. And so that was on a smaller scale, kind of what I was after. Excuse me. But I wasn't a billion-dollar company, and there were other places to buy my work for collectors. So and what happened is that the UK was losing out on a bunch of sales. All their galleries were losing sales to the US galleries because the US galleries were all independently operated and could answer the email right away and could get things that the UK galleries, which had to go through a chain of distribution, couldn't get. And so people wanted what they wanted, and they went to where they could find it. So, anyway, so the point is that I had a plan of attack, and I even had a plan with my own management that tied, because when I signed up with my management company, they also had a lot of promises about minimum sales and what they could do. And so when I drew the contract with them, one of the things I negotiated was a trailing sales standards that they had to meet. And if they didn't meet it, then I could get out of the contract. So when somebody's asking you to perform something, they also have to perform something. Otherwise, you're just working for them, and if they're not obligated to fulfill any sort of duties on their end, then it's just all you doing it. And that's how you get screwed over too, or you can. So if you have somebody or some company making offers to you and making promises, then you want to make sure that you get that in writing, because they can promise you all the things that they want. They can swear that they're going to do this, and they can point to the cake yesterday, look at what we've done before. But if they're not willing to put it down in writing or to commit to their own promises somehow, then they're full of shit, generally. And the thing that I've learned to do is to not get too caught up in wild promises of success that they're offering or whatever it is. And sorry, I'm looking for another color here. So you want to obligate them to their word. And I mean, that's, I guess, the most simple way I can put it for you. And so the management company, they agreed to it. So they were sincere about what they thought they could do for me, and so there was no issue. And anybody that you're going to do business with, if they have a problem living up to what they think they can do, then you probably should think twice about what kind of relationship you're getting involved with there, unless you see some way to make it work for you. So I guess the whole point of this is that there's a caveat to, like, it's like going back to the work for hire project. The caveats I gave to that are, like when you're starting out and you're trying to make a way for yourself, even if you're just you need the job because you got bills to pay. There are times when you just you got to do what you got to do, and I understand that. But you should be aware of what it is that you're giving up under a work for hire. So if you're going to do a work for hire project, I generally say that you don't do that unless you're doing a project you don't want any association with, you don't want your name on it. It's not in line with anything else that you do. You don't see any other way you could profit off this by selling prints or relicensing the work, etc. Or you're really desperate. You just need to make the buck. I mean, I ran into that with when I was starting out. I was like, I tried to get out of this. Like, what happened for me is, like, I got commissioned to do a project, and then halfway through the project, they presented me a contract that was not in line with what we had verbally agreed with. And what I did was I just said, okay, well, I'll look at this. I'll sign this later. I finished the project, brought it in, finished, and then told him I wasn't going to sign the contract. And then this guy just, like, threw a fit, and I wasn't going to get paid, and I caved because it was like only $150, but I was desperate. I was broke, and I needed the money, and so I took the pay and just moved on. And it was not really a project that with an image that I could really do anything with anyway, so it wasn't a big loss. But I did what I had to do, and so if you're in that position, I understand that. And I'm not gonna, like, talk a bunch of shit about people who give in to things, because sometimes you just got to do what's prudent in a situation. The goal is to be able to avoid those situations. So in fact, after that happened, that's when I really started trying to educate myself as best as I could what copyright was, what work for hire meant, and all these things. And because even though I went to art school, they never really trained you on what it is exactly that you were trying to sell, especially as commercial art. You were really focused on making a portfolio and then getting a hold of art directors and all that sort of thing. But they didn't talk about legal contracts and licensing and how that worked, and how to negotiate terms, and how to navigate through that sort of thing. And I'm not sure why. It seems like that would be like the most fundamental thing you would have in an art school program that was pumping out commercial artists, would be to really do deep dives into the legal end and the business end of the art. But what I think was happening is that a lot of the faculty at the schools were, although they were good instructors, they weren't necessarily up to date in the most modern business practices. They weren't relying necessarily on their commercial work to make a living. They were some of them have been faculty for 15, 20 years, so they were just outdated. They weren't aware of what we were headed for as much as they would have been if they were actively working in the field in a major way. And it might have been that, by the time I got to where I was graduating, that the business landscape was changing so much that there might not have been a way that they could have even understood it themselves. Who knows? But all I can say is that I certainly wasn't prepared for what I was about to run into. So I learned all these things, and the funny thing is, then I got really, really militant about copyright and drawing up contracts to the point where I had this woman who, she had written this sort of poetry book, and she wanted a cover for it, and she hadn't had it published yet. So I created the painting. I sold her a license to use the work that expired after a certain period of time. Expired like after a year or something. So she had a year to publish it. And what happened is that she didn't get to it. She was a kind of like a rich divorcee. I don't know what she did for a living, but she had money, and she wasn't a writer. I mean, not professionally, but she had written this, like children's book. It was like about her or for her son or something. I can't remember exactly what it was. But after it expired, she contacted me again, and I sold her a new license for it. And so I sold her the license twice. I wouldn't have ever thought to do that if I hadn't buckled down to learn everything I could learn about licensing and copyright law. And part of learning how to do all this too, it helped. You ended up having to learn some of the vernacular of like the legalese, like what contracts are really saying. Like, it can be really confusing to understand the phraseology, how these things are structured. But by doing this a lot, I got somewhat familiar with it, and it led me into a situation that hasn't much to do with the art side of things. But in 2001, I got a red light enforcement ticket from the city of Beverly Hills. I was driving like at 1 o'clock in the morning, coming back from like a comedy club show, and apparently it went through a stoplight, and it was my thought it was a yellow light, but I got a ticket in the mail, and it said that I had run the red light by a fraction of a second, and now they wanted to charge me like $280, and they sent the photo of me in the car and the timestamp on it and blah, blah, blah. It's like, and basically with some sort of verbiage on the ticket, it's like, there's no use in fighting this. You're caught dead to rights. Just pay us, and then you can pay another fee to go to traffic school and get it taken off your record. And somehow this felt like extortion, like this sort of like, you can't fight this, just pay us and go. It was just like a money trap for going through a red light in a fraction of a second at 1 o'clock in the morning when there's no other traffic on the road, etc. So I decided that I couldn't afford to lose that money. $280 was a lot of money to me at the time, and I needed every bucks I could get. But I had forgot to there's some sort of filing deadline that I had missed. So I went down to the courthouse and I said, I need to, change my court date. And they said, well, you missed that. We sent it to you certified mail and you didn't respond. I said, I never received it. And they said, well, we sent it to you certified mail. And I said, show me your certified mail receipt. And the court clerk went and looked for it and couldn't find it. And she said, well, you got lucky. I can't find it. So they give me a new court date. And I then contacted a law firm in San Diego that had gotten a bunch of these red light enforcement tickets kicked out of San Diego, and he was selling like a house yourself sort of thing, and he was selling like this sort of booklet of motions and different legal angles that he took, and for like $100. So I ordered that and read through all the things that they did. And I started taking his motions and sort of modifying them to fit my situation, and looking up all the California vehicle code laws. And I started to uncover that there was a whole bunch of shenanigans going on with the city of Beverly Hills and Lockheed Martin, who had operated these machines. And so I spent like weeks researching legal arguments, how to make them, reading these motions, reading case law on FindLaw.com, just going back to like the 1950s. So all the things that the lawyer, all these briefs that he had authorities, which were cited court opinions of like higher courts, Supreme Courts, appellate courts, all that kind of stuff. And I started sort of going down the rabbit hole of figuring out and finding out like where, how these arguments were being made. And, so they would make an argument and cite the precedent. And I would go look at the precedent, read that whole court case, and then there'd be more citations in that court case and those arguments and those briefs. I'd follow those back and back and back. Anyways, I started to learn that, why lawyers make so much money is because it's really tedious and kind of boring unless you're personally involved with it. So I then went to the city of Beverly Hills and got a copy of their contract with Lockheed Martin, which was public record. And I discovered that Lockheed Martin was getting paid per conviction. And so they were reviewing all these photos and then forwarding it on to the Beverly Hills Police Department. And then the Beverly Hills Police Department were just issuing citations. And then they would have a court case where you'd have a room full of everybody fighting the same thing. And the cop would get up and make his speech about how these photo enforcement machines work, why they're scientific, blah, 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 blah. And then that would be the evidence in the case to try to convict motorists. And so one thing that I did is I went to the courthouse one day and I watched this go on. So I watched what happens in the courtroom with these cases, and I saw person after person get up and make the same arguments that I had seen as good arguments to make. One of them was that it was a speed trap. California Vehicle Code doesn't allow you to use speed to convict. Doesn't allow the use of speed traps to convict of a vehicle code violation. And so they would go up and just make these objections thinking that they were wise and they're going to get by with it. But the judge would just deny all these motions, and then they would get convicted anyways. And they looked like confused, like they go up there like all chest puffed out, and like blah blah blah. I object. This is not illegal. This is a speed trap, and then they would get overruled and they would get convicted. But I saw what they were doing. They were making mistakes because they weren't citing an authority, so the judge didn't have any reason to rule in their favor. So I saw what mistakes people were arguing and making in these, and I went. So what I did is I filed. So let me back up. So to the thing about traffic court is that you don't get a trial by jury, you don't get legal representation because it's an infraction. So they lower the bar and the penalty. So you're not threatened with jail. So they take away constitutional rights because it's not a real crime like a misdemeanor. It's an infraction. So you don't get some of these other rights that are guaranteed to you. And so you just have people, representing themselves mostly. So the stakes are low enough that it just turns into a money racket for the city. But they are still obligated to follow their own procedures in court and rules of evidence and discovery. So what I did is I started making them, I developed a strategy of instead of arguing whether I ran or didn't run a red light, I started arguing whether what they were doing was even legal, and if they'd even followed their own legal standards that they had set in law. And so there's a few things that angles I took on it. One of it was that they were operating an illegal speed trap, and what I demonstrated was that by their own explanation is that the system would set off a photograph if you were traveling through the intersection at like more than 3 miles an hour. And so I argue that they weren't enforcing a stop, they were enforcing a speed limit. And the California statutes are pretty clear that you can't use a speed trap to enforce anything under the California Vehicle Code. And when I made that argument in court, I ended up getting into just a back and forth with the prosecuting attorney, which they didn't just rely on the cop's testimony for my case. They ended up relying on, they sent actually a city attorney, because I think I'm getting ahead of myself on this, but what I did is I filed a notice of discovery on a traffic ticket, and I requested that they send me all the evidence that they have. And if they don't do that, you can go to court and say, I filed discovery and they didn't send me anything. And the case will get kicked out because they didn't follow their proper procedures. You're entitled to get all the evidence that they have. And so they sent me a notice of discovery. I filed several pre-trial written motions to dismiss. One of them based on a speed trap. One of them based on the city was giving Lockheed Martin a kickback per conviction, which gave an incentive to. First of all, they weren't allowed to do that. They weren't the only people that were allowed to look at that evidence were police officers, according to the way that the statutes were written when they passed it. The city also was required by law to hold public hearings or inform the public of these systems going into place. And during the trial, the only thing they did is that the police officer stood up and he said that there were things that were mailed to the residents in the town, and that it was published in a local paper. And he said those things. So during the trial, I asked if he had any of those publications or examples of any of those mailings, and if he had any certified mail receipts, or did he mail them himself? And he said he didn't do it himself. And so I argued that everything he said was hearsay because he didn't do it. He was testifying to something that happened that he wasn't involved with. And there seemed to be some concern about that between the attorney and the judge, the prosecuting attorney. And the judge ultimately ruled that because the officer was part of the entire program, that he didn't have to personally be involved with it to be able to testify with it. So judge didn't rule in my favor on that one. But so anyways, before the trial, I filed all these pre-trial written motions, and basically making the city jump through a bunch of hoops. So they responded, and then I responded back. And so by the time I got to the trial date, I was waiting for my trial, and the officer came up to me and told me that, oh, we've been reviewing your case, and we see that, the timestamp on your photograph is a little fuzzy, so we're going to move to dismiss your case. I'm like, oh, okay. So he said, oh, you can go ahead and leave if you want. You don't have to stick around for it. It's just a technical thing. I'm like, it's like, all right, I think I'll stick around anyway. And I'm glad I did, because the before they got started, they made a motion to dismiss the case, but the judge denied it. He denied the prosecution's motion. And if I had left, I would have been convicted, and I would have ended up losing my money anyway. So again, don't believe things that people tell you unless you have it in writing from someone with authority. So if you're going to, going back to the contract issue that I started this discussion about, if you're going to, if someone's promising you things, get that in writing. Otherwise, it don't count. It don't mean nothing. And if somebody isn't willing to put it in writing, then they don't have a real offer. They're just they're just bullshitting you, or they don't have the authority to do it, or they're just, whatever. They're giving you a line to get you to do what they want you to do. So anyway, so like I said, so normally the police officer gives his testimony, presents the evidence, which is a maintenance log sheet from the camera that's being operated to show that it was in working order before and after your photo was taken in there, and it explains how the system works and how it's infallible, so on and so forth. But because I had submitted all these pretrial motions and notices of discovery, the city decided they were going to send their city prosecutor to handle the case. You have to keep in mind this was a pretty lucrative operation for the city, and they didn't want to have it upended because some yokel went in there and made a case on their own and threw out a bunch of, got a bunch of it thrown out. So they had a vested interest in making sure that their little scheme was not going to be thwarted by little old me. The judge didn't approve their request to dismiss, mostly because he wanted to see what I was all about, because this judge was completely bored. He was sitting there doing the same thing over and over with everybody coming in, making the same arguments that he couldn't rule in their favor and blah blah blah. And so this, at least in the mundaneness of doing this, prosecuting the same infraction day in and day out, this was a little bit more interesting. Somebody had some argument. He didn't know who I was, so he wanted to see my arguments in person, I think. So the other thing that what eventually happened is I got through a few of my motions to dismiss, and the judge stopped the case, and he reviewed the photo again, and then he said, I like your arguments, but I can't rule in your favor on a lot of these because there's appellate decisions that bind me, and some that you won't even be aware of that have happened recently. He said, but what I can do is I can reverse my ruling in the prosecution's motion to dismiss, and so he dismissed my case. And then he's like, are you a law student or something? And I was like, no, I'm an artist and I sell my art on the street in Venice Beach. And he looked at the prosecuting attorney. He's like, he kind of shamed me. He's like, what do you have to say for yourself? He was like, this is just some artist. I said, yeah, well, I have plenty of time on my hands. And I've dealt with enough contracts to know when I'm getting screwed over. And this seemed like I was getting screwed over here. So I decided to fight it. And we all had a good laugh. And I got the case dismissed, and I beat it. And one of the reasons he didn't want me to keep going on is because I was about to get to a few more other arguments that I had that would have benefited the line of people behind me getting ready to argue their case. And he didn't want them to get their cases dismissed on a technicality because I came in there and exposed it. Just that's kind of what he was inferring to me at the time. So that's a long story, really, to explain that because I had gotten screwed a few times, or I didn't know what I was doing with contracts, and I went and learned all this stuff. It gave me the ability to understand what I was doing in defending myself on a traffic ticket. And I learned a really valuable lesson in how to enforce rules that are there to protect you. Like, there are rules of court that if you don't require them to be enforced, they'll just steamroll over you and not play by their own rules. And especially in traffic cases, that's what they're counting on. They're counting on you not being an attorney, and they'll end up taking shortcuts because it's cheaper, and they can get a conviction, they get your money. but it didn't work in my case. And yeah, I didn't get convicted of that. So if you run into these situations where, you know, you feel like you got the short end of the stick or whatever, that's going to happen. But the best thing you can do is try to learn everything you can about copyright law, licensing, all that kind of stuff. It's the if nothing else, you'll understand when someone is trying to shaft you, and you can either decide if it's worth it, because sometimes there might, even like so I was getting the short end of the stick in the distribution deal with the UK galleries, but it was giving me a platform that was immense, and it was a real platform. It was something real, and I understood that the short end of the stick wouldn't be a forever thing. I would eventually, if things worked, I would have I would either be able to renegotiate my position, or I would just have gotten all the exposure and I would still be okay with all my US gallery markets. So I all I had to really lose was just the short-term sales. You know, like I wouldn't make as much money short-term. And I was doing a lot more work too for, you know, the time I was in like 20 or 30 gallery accounts. It was like a little overwhelming, to be honest. And there's a lot of pressure on a corporate side of like more, faster, better, like all the time. And that will, you know, really burn you out. So you learn either it's not worth it or you end up in a better place and somewhere else. So but you know, you don't want to necessarily go into these situations blindly, like somebody is putting it over on you and you don't know what you don't have any idea what you're going to get out of it. If you don't see a positive net effect for you or an opportunity that makes sense and a way out of it, if it starts going sideways, then that's generally when I think twice about what I'm getting into. Sometimes it's abundantly clear, sometimes it's not. I'm sure there's plenty of opportunities that I have just missed because I stuck to some sort of guns on my own side, on my own, you know, whatever. I wanted to be hard-nosed about what I wanted out of it. I'm sure there's opportunities that I've missed because of that, but I don't have any regrets. And mostly I see things that like problems I've avoided because I've had a clear plan or a thought about what my intentions are, or what the goal is in a certain deal for me. The one thing I try not to rely on is just pure hope that things work out, or somebody's just pressuring me into something. So it's, that's something over time you got to figure out what's worth it to you, right? Like what's in your best interest. So it's funny, I end up talking about fighting traffic tickets the whole time. If you're living in California, the one thing I learned from all that is that you don't have to even go to court. You can fight it through the mail, through written declaration. And when you do that, the police officer doesn't have the opportunity to see like if you get pulled over and get a ticket, a lot of times when you show up to court, the officer's getting, you can correct me if you're a police officer, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this too. But from what I remember, the cop was getting paid to go to court and time off to show up, and it's, plus he could see your face and see you there and remind him of the incident and all kinds of things. When you do a trial by written declaration, they have a certain amount of time they have to respond. And if the officer doesn't respond, then the case is dismissed. But the officer doesn't get to see you in the courtroom to remind him of anything that you said or did. He has to just kind of remember it. And And if you lose a written declaration, you can just request a new trial called a trial de novo. And so you get basically 2 cracks at it. So while you don't get a trial by jury or legal representation guaranteed at these infractions, you do get the opportunity to, kind of 2 bites at the apple. If you lose, you can just try it again and then hope the officer doesn't show up to court. And then again, you win. I don't know if it's this way in other states or not. But in California, that's the way it worked. Well, at least back when I was doing this, I haven't got it. Actually, I got a ticket since then, and I fought it through the mail and won. It was, I don't know. I like fighting those things. I don't like taking things lying down. Sometimes it's just better to move on, like knowing when to fight and when to just move along. That's That's a whole other skill and topic in and of itself, actually. But anyway, well, that was a quick hour. We're almost to the hour mark, and then I'm gonna stop for the day and get some other things I got to get going here. I hope you guys are enjoying it. It seems that most of the feedback I'm getting is like people are seem to be entertained by these things, and I'm having fun doing them. I'm going to, damn it, going to be out of town the next couple of Fridays, so this will be my last live stream until probably the end of the month. So if you guys, again, if there's anything you think would be interesting to talk about, that sort of thing, let me know. And I will try to get to them when I come back. So anyway, yeah, just working on all these, got a bunch of paintings that are like 90% finished, and I got to put the finishing touches on them soon. So this is one of them, sitting around for a while. Actually, I developed a reference for this in Blender, 3D software, so I've been modeling things to use as reference, and then so I'm using some digital planning in a lot of this newer work. Anyways, I will catch you guys in a few weeks. I hope you have a good weekend, and I'll chat with you soon.